Hello, and welcome to episode number 162 of the Board Game Barrage podcast, a podcast about board games, the latest hotness, and how to have fun with your friends, even when you're losing. I am Kellen, here to talk to you quickly, the Red Tank, joined by my friends, Mark and Neelan.
Hello.
Hello, it's great to be here. How's everyone doing?
Excuse me. I'm talking fast this episode, Neelan. Sir. Today on the Board Game Barrage podcast, we're going to be talking about a publisher trend to releasing the dice game and the card game versions of board games, but a broader discussion about re-implementations, games that are in a shared universe where, one game comes out and then 7 more come out in a sort of series, and how they all relate to each other and what we think about those games and, some of our favorite the dice games, some of our favorite the card games, and even pondering on what would make a exceptional the dice game or the card game version. But before we do that, we're going to be covering the games that we have played this week. We're going to start off with Gods Love Dinosaurs. That's hard. It's plural.
Yes,
on both ends.
Plural on both ends.
On both the gods and the dinosaurs.
Yes.
So Gods Love Dinosaurs.
Yep.
That's hard to say, Pandasaurus. It is. Is it not, Neelan?
I'm not sure it is, but...
Excuse me?
It's definitely not. The fact
God
there's a
loves
plural...
God loves dinosaurs or Gods love dinosaur. Which is easier to say?
The first one, because the second one makes no sense.
It's actually, there's an S at the end of all the words. Weird enough.
God loves dinosaurs.
We're in person and you pass me the note. There's an S on all the words, Kellen. Take it again. Try again. All the words have S's. Neelan is going to be talking to us about Gods Loves Dinosaurs.
No!
Wait. No. I thought I got it. Because I went S, like
but it's not actually an S in the middle word. It's just God.
Well, you said they all ended.
That was a joke.
That was a joke, because it's obviously not true.
You got me. You got me. I didn't get the joke. Oops. Well, you see why I messed up.
Yeah, I get it now.
Okay. Neelan is going to be talking to us about Gods Love Dinosaurs, followed by Mark kicking off a discussion about Praktanuka.
Yeah, good luck. I was going to say, good luck. If we had that much trouble with Gods Love Dinosaurs, the Nanga Parbat is going to kill us.
The attempt at Praktanuka.
I went for it.
You did
I'm
go
a fast
for it.
talker.
No, that's okay.
Okay, Mark will be covering Nanga Parbat, and then I will kick off a discussion about a much easier to say game, Raw, the dice game. Neelan,
yes.
Why don't you talk to us about Gods Loves Dinosaurs?
So Gods Love Dinosaurs is a newish game by Pandasaurus. It is designed by Casper Lapp, who is best known for Magic Maze, which, if you're not familiar with, is a delightful, light, family-weight game where you are playing simultaneously, but no one can talk to each other. Worth checking out if you've not tried it before. But Gods Love Dinosaurs is an equally delightful, equally light, very accessible family game that I think is quite good. Gods Love Dinosaurs is primarily a tile-laying game. You have a board of little tiles. Every tile is 2 hexes joined together, and each of those hexes represents the habitat of specific animals. There are rabbits, there are frogs, there are rats. Those are the prey animals. Then there are eagles and tigers, which are the predators. And then finally, dinosaurs. And as the name suggests, you are a god and you love dinosaurs. So what you're trying to do at the end of the game is work your ecosystem up towards having a lot of dinosaurs and dinosaur eggs. But to get there, you sort of have to breed your smaller prey animals. You have to produce a lot of rabbits. You have to do that so that the tigers and eagles can eat the prey animals and produce more predators. And because the dinosaurs will only produce eggs if they're eating the larger predators, you're working towards getting predators on the map that the dinosaurs can eat so they can lay eggs, which will give you victory points. That is the basic loop of the game, but I think that one of the joys of this is just the way that the little ecosystem works. So all the tiles on this player board are arranged in columns, and when a specific column empties, that specific animal activates for all players. So let's say we empty the frog column. Once that player has laid their tile, every player then breeds all of their frogs, which just simply means that every frog that has its preferred habitat next to it produces another frog in that habitat. The predators, when one of them activates, they're going to move a certain number of spaces trying to eat the prey. They have to eat at least one to stay alive, but if they eat more than that, they're just creating new predators along the route. And then finally, when the dinosaurs activate, which they will activate at regularly recurring intervals based on where the dinosaur marker is. So let's say that the dinosaur marker is on the tiger activation. Once the tigers activate, then the dinosaurs activate. You'll start by creating dinosaurs on your mountain spaces and eating as many predators as you can along the way in order to produce eggs. And that is kind of all there is to the game. It's beautifully simple, but the joy of this is watching these ecosystems play out, because there is this delicate balance of, you want your predators to eat prey so they can reproduce, but you don't want them to eat all of the prey, because then that means you sort of have to spend actions to kickstart your prey population again. It is a very interesting game that, like, over the times that I've now played it, seeing yourself get better at it, like our point totals like gradually increase because we're better at preserving the ecosystem without like entirely consuming it. It's really smart. It's certainly better than it has any right to be at its weight. It's one of those games that just feels like the perfect weight for what it's trying to do. Very, very pleasantly surprised.
Any games you can think of that it's comparable to in terms of like accessibility and weight? Like compared to, say, Ticket to Ride, the prototypical example of.
I would say that, like, it's in that ballpark, honestly. Okay. Like, I think like there's a little bit of, you have to remember that prey activate one way, predators activate a different way, dinosaurs activate a third way, but those rules aren't that complicated. It's like, this one has to start and end on the mountain and can move 5. This one has to hit a thing and then can move 3. You know what I mean? It's just that. And there's only like 3 of those variations. But I think in the first game, that was the thing that could have used some sort of iconography or player aid just as a reminder, because it was like, oh wait, how does this work again? How does this one activate? But like, other than that, no, it's like, it's dead simple.
And the main decision point is where to place tiles?
Yes, well, specifically which tile to grab, because this is probably worth re-emphasizing. Every tile is positioned in a column that is corresponding to specific animal activation. So if I take the last tile from the tiger column, then the tigers will activate next. So it's that balance of, I want this tile, but do I want tigers to activate right now?
And by activate, do you mean have sex?
Yes, eat and have sex.
Activate. But my other joke, and probably the more prominent one, is the title of this thing. I just want to understand what God has to do with it, because like just going through like the BGG top 100, it's sort of like Gods Love Pandemic, Gods Love Terraforming Mars, Gods Love Gaia Project, Gods Love The Castles of Burgundy, Gods Love Wingspan. Like, all of those games are abstracted.
What you're saying is there's no game that can't be improved by adding God's Love to the front of its title.
A singular God,
yes.
But
God
no,
loves.
but that it's like, it's odd, right? Or no, because a lot of games you're an abstracted sort of person moving things around, but in this case, they've added God.
Totally. I think what is actually quite cute about the title is it feels like the most literal version of you being a god, right? Because you're like creating the earth, you're populating it with animals, and you're like watching the whole thing come fit together. And then like the title itself like tells you the victory condition, because all that matters at the end of the game is having more dinosaurs than anyone else. So it kind of spells out both what the game is and how to win it, like in 3 words, which is, I think, pretty delightful actually in retrospect.
It is just hard to say.
I think that is all I have to say about Gods Love Dinosaurs. I think definitely go into this knowing it's an ultra-light game, but one that I think punches above its weight a little bit, and certainly is very pleasant. A light game that you're not going to feel mad for having played.
I'd be excited to try this. I think I may wait for the, Hit the Other God expansion that adds some interaction.
The Elder Gods Love Dinosaurs?
Well, but no joke, like I'm still waiting for like the Wingspan expansion that makes that a little fightier, because it feels like a place they should go at some point, and then perhaps it'll be right up my alley.
That is Gods Love Dinosaurs.
Nailed it.
So Neelan and I played the latest game from the one and only Dr. Finn, Nanga Parbat. which is a 2-player game that was just released. This game is themed around mountain climbing and having Sherpas, but let me tell you what it's really about. It's about pyramids and animals, and the number 6, actually, interestingly enough. Mark. So what you're doing, what'd you say? I missed that.
The devil's number.
Actually, there is I think 6 sixes.
Is 6? Yeah, or 6 sixes. Not quite a 666, but
yeah.
No, it's the devil's number. What do you mean? I know what I'm talking about. The whole episode is about deities.
This is our most theological episode. So what you are doing in this game is...
Why do you think I went to seminary for 4 years?
I know. I was meaning to ask you about that, but I'm glad it came out with Nanga Parbat that we had this conversation. So Nanga Parbat, when I say it's about pyramids, the best way to sort of picture the board that you're playing on is a pyramid. So if you think of the 6-block pyramid where it's 1 on the top, 2 beneath that, and 3 beneath that. That's sort of standard 6-block pyramid. So this board has 6 of those arranged in a pyramid of its own. So it's a 6-block pyramid on top with 2 6-block pyramids beneath it, and then 3 6-block pyramids beneath that. So these 36 spaces, so 6 times 6, are filled with 6 kinds of animals. And each animal has 6 meeples of it on the board. So 6 animals, 6 meeples each, filling the 36 spaces. And that is your game board. What you're doing on your turn is you are picking an animal from the active pyramid. So, for example, if to start the game, the pyramid on top is the active pyramid, you're selecting an animal from that pyramid. The placement of the animal that you select in that mini pyramid dictates where the next active pyramid will be. So if you sort of, again, imagine a 6-block pyramid, if for the first turn I take an animal from the lower right-hand corner of that pyramid, then my opponent's selection comes from the pyramid in the lower right-hand corner of the greater board pyramid, if that makes sense. So that dictates where my opponent's going to take his animal, and then wherever he or she takes their animal dictates where the next pyramid that we're playing in is. All this is in an effort to set collect the animals, for one thing. The animals that you're set collecting, you're trying to collect either like animals or different animals. And at any point on your turn, you can elect to score that. So if I have 4 of one type of animal, I can score for similar animals. And it's got a thing where if you're the first person to score for 4 of a kind, then nobody else can score that. The next person has to score either 3 of a kind or 5 of a kind if that's still available. So there's that rush to a scoring point aspect to the game. Another thing you can do is as you are removing animals, you're placing your meeples on it. At any point, again, after you finish your turn, you can elect to, if your meeples are in a contiguous line, you can elect to score that contiguous line. So again, if you have 6 meeples connected, you can elect to, at the end of your turn, score for 6 in a row of these meeple connections. So those are the 3 scoring criteria. It's meeples in a row, it's like animals, or it's different animals. There's a further wrinkle in that every animal has an associated power. So some animals allow you to switch a person with an animal. Some animals allow you to switch 2 different animals. Some animals allow you to ignore the rule about which pyramid you're currently playing in and play in any pyramid you want. And you can play as many animals as you want, as you've collected. But once you've used one for its power, it's exhausted. You can no longer use it for its power. But if you had, say, 3 switch animal for person pieces, you could use all 3 of them on the same turn if you wanted. One last little wrinkle about this game is that when you elect to score animals, either like or different animals, they are removed from your board whether or not you've used them or not, whether or not you've exhausted them for their power or not. So there's this aspect of the game where you want to jump out and score for the set collection aspect, but you want to do it after you've been able to take advantage of the animal's power. But that may sort of ruin your tempo. It may result in a more powerful move, but at the cost of tempo. And that's an interesting aspect to this game. And that's basically the way Nanga Parbat works. It's a very zero-sum push-pull game that is very puzzly. There's a lot of, if I take this animal, that means we're playing in this pyramid next, which means that Nealon is definitely going to take this because he needs it to complete his set. But that means if he takes that, we're going to be playing in that pyramid next, and is there anything there for me? And if not, then maybe I should do something else. And that was one, I would say, maybe drawback to the game, particularly in the early game. There's so many choices that I think there's no real reason to get that analytical into your turns because there's so many variations. Once there's one sort of permutation, it could go a whole bunch of ways and there's no reason to overthink it. But once you get to the middle end game where This is a game where the scores are likely going to be very close, and you are desperate to get like the 5 of a kind, and you can really sort of plan out situations that will either preclude you or exclude you from getting that. It does get quite, in my experience, mathy, a situation where you are very much analyzing your moves. Now, the saving grace is that it's a 2-player game, and it's not like there's a whole table of people that are analyzing moves, so it's not going to get too bogged down in terms of gameplay time. And in honesty, Neil and I are going to play this a couple times, and none of our games have dragged. They felt, fairly quick. That is Nanga Parbat. I really liked it. If it was a longer game, I don't know if I would want to play it very often, but for how quick it goes, it seems like a very obvious, like if you're the first couple people at a game night to something to play to pass 15, 20 minutes, it is very rewarding in the analysis part. If you're into like puzzly games, that is rewarding and interesting when you're trying to activate all these animals' powers in the ideal way.
I think that's right. And that was the highlights of both games for me, were the times where I felt like, okay, I'm going to use this power, which moves this into place, which means I can place this guy down, which gets me 6 camps, blocking Markov right before he wanted to do it. Like, there are moments where the perfect activation of animals at the right time is going to feel great. Because there's one other little twist to the scoring, that if you land on your opponent's marker, you get an extra point to exceed them. You can't be in the same victory point spot. So when you math all that out and you land on them and get the bonus point, like all of that comes together and feels really, really, really good. I do think it has a little bit of like that, like you were saying, Mark, that sort of very tight, I'm going to do this, and I hope it's not going to be enough that Mark's just going to edge up. And it's going like this tug of war back and forth constantly, which does feel good. That is what you want from a 2-player game. You don't want it to feel like a blowout, but we did wonder at the end of our games whether the scoring differential would ever be that large, because it does feel a little bit like you'll always be able to get somewhat within reach of your opponent's score. One thing I will say that I do think actually was quite interesting is I didn't get a solid grasp that any of the animals was like especially better than any other. I think that all of the powers felt very situational, but very valuable in those situations. I would say, like, with one exception, there was one animal that just gets you a point if you're behind, like the red pandas is like this catch-up animal. But I could even still imagine situations, and I saw them in our game, where if you're exactly 1 point behind, then that becomes a 2-point animal swing, which, you know, is still valuable. So I came away feeling really good about this. Like, it just felt like I would probably play it differently every time I did it, in terms of like which animals I would collect, which powers I would covet. And as a tight 2-player game that does have that very tight back and forth, I thought it was solid.
Neelan's eyes lit up when he was describing sort of the puzzly nature of things kind of coming into place. And I took it off my list while I was thinking that. No, I actually would be interested in trying this. My first question, is this like a God Loves Nanga Parbat situation, or are you playing as a Sherpa?
You are playing, I think, as a hiker following the Sherpas.
But you're also trapping these animals, important.
Yes, trapping.
Not sure what that's all about.
So it's a God Loves Nanga Parbat situation?
Yeah.
Sure.
Great.
And that is Nanga Parbat by Dr. Finn Games.
The last game that we wanted to talk about that will pave the way for our feature topic is Ra, the dice game.
Also a god game.
Ooh,
one of my gods. One of the Egyptian ones.
God loves
Ra,
the dice game. Ra is a quintessential auction game in the trilogy of Medici, Ra, and Modern Art by the only true and living Dr. Reiner Knizia. Ra, the dice game, is a Yahtzee-style game that is in some ways like Ra because it uses all the same pictures from the Ra game. In Ra, the dice game, you are rolling dice. You are able to re-roll twice. If you get one symbol, you can't re-roll, and that's sort of the turn order. And then you are assigning those dice to tracks. Tracks on tracks on tracks. There's the Pharaoh track, the Nile track, the Civilization track, the Monument track. All little different mini-games that you are playing. Mini-games like, you know, the Monument track is sort of the end of game scoring as opposed to the end of round scoring. So as you're building there, you're doing a little bit of area control, a little bit of trying to get cubes in rows and columns to score points. There are simpler things like the Pharaoh track, where at the end of the round, whoever is at the highest position will score points and then move back. Whoever is in the lowest position will lose points and then move forward. And then there's the Nile track, which is another sort of race up, but you have to spend more dice in order to score points, but your position on that Nile does not reset. And then there is a civilization track where you are trying to spread out to the different colors within that track in order to score points. So everything that you do on a turn is designed to force you to have to go, what is everyone else doing and how can I beat them? You roll all the dice. You lose one, damn it, because that is going to increase the turn order. And then you sit there and go, well, I could move up the Nile 2 spaces, but then I'm only tying Neelan. And I got to figure out if that's okay. So essentially, you're playing Yahtzee, but you're competing in 4 or 5 different little mini games that are very reminiscent of the mini games that you're competing in Ra. It's Big Brother, except, it replaces the bidding and the auctioning with just taking your turn in sort of a dice game variant. This game had us having a very enjoyable time, just rolling the dice and immediately cursing at each other. How dare you, sir? You're doing way too good on that track. If you get 4 of one specific die, the die that moves the round marker along, you actually trigger a disaster, and then you get to target an area and force all other players to remove bits of their progress, which is devastating. And so if your game is sort of going sideways, you can sort of start trying to go for different things. So there's mild little push your luck elements embedded in the Yahtzee mechanism. A lot of the triggers to score will be, 1 and 2 are the same, but if I get 3, I'm going to do quite a bit better. And that adds the push your luck element of, okay, I have 1, I really want to get to 3, or I have 2 and I really need that 3rd. And so you start re-rolling things and desperately hoping that you can win the game. This was delightful. I was very, very pleasantly surprised. I think the premise at the beginning of our discussion here is that usually our expectations for these games are quite low when there's a colon and then it says the dice game or the card game. What did you guys think of Ra, the dice game?
I enjoyed it quite a bit. This is a game that I've had in my collection for a while, and really the main reason why I hadn't brought it out earlier is because I was just expecting a neutered version of a game I love so much and just not really looking forward to it. I thought it would just have the Raw theme and then have nothing really beneath it. And I was just super pleasantly surprised. This has been the game I've played most over the last couple of weeks. And it's interesting because, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, in greater detail later, but in some ways it shares things with its older brother, but in other ways, and in the most crucial way, where Raw is for many people, the quintessential auction game, this is no auction. This is absolutely no auction, and is very interesting, surprising, pleasantly surprising that a game that has stripped out the greatest part of Raw, or the most fundamental part of Raw, has turned out to be so, to me, fun. I really, really enjoyed every time I played it.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised, especially after having played Medici the Dice Game recently, which I think the gulf between Medici and Medici the Dice Game is quite wide, and that that's another example of Knizia taking his own design and turning it into a dice game. Whereas I think that it was narrower for me. I've not played Ra that much, so it's not on as much of a pedestal for me personally as is for a lot of gamers out there. But I felt Ra the Dice Game was excellent. I would happily play that again in a heartbeat.
I think an interesting point of comparison that I think is relevant is I actually thought a lot about Tekhenu after we finished Ra the Dice Game, in the sense that it almost struck me that someone played Ra the Dice Game and then went, I'm going to make that a complicated, heavy Euro game with, instead of 4 competitions, there's going to be 18. And there's just something interesting about you're competing over these different little mini competitions, and each roll you're like, well, that's going to help me in that one, but maybe I'll re-roll them and force against what the dice are telling me to do. So for some reason, Tekhenu just kept coming to my mind, and that's not a knock on Tekhenu. It's just, in this realm, this was just that distilled, sit and have a good chat and play a good board game moment for us. I really, really liked Ra, the dice game. Yeah,
I actually, when you first mentioned the comparison to Tekhenu, as I usually do, thought you were absolutely crazy. But thinking about it a little bit longer, there's some things that are completely different where you're playing with a shared dice in Tekhenu, and this is you're doing your own push your luck Yahtzee thing. But yeah, I mean, the mini game thing, there is something there. I can see what you're talking about.
There's the area control game, the track game. It's very distilled, so it's not really the same thing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But it was very enjoyable. But let's get to the but. It should not be called Ra, and it's a disgrace to the name.
Disagree.
Excuse me?
Disagree.
You can't disagree with me. This is my episode. So I think my central thesis here and what I want to get to is sort of this idea that a game, to some extent, has like a point. And I will say that the point of Raw is the auctions and the pushing your luck, okay, within those auctions. That's what typifies Raw. And what we have here is publisher greed. It is a publisher taking the good name of Raw, God loves Raw, and then applying that to a different game that misses the point of the game and therefore should not have the name Raw. Mark, how do you respond?
Okay, I disagree wholeheartedly. The game I had in my head before I played it would have been a game that I would have agreed with you. I would have assumed that's what they're doing. But I think Raw the Dice game, again, sort of inexplicably to me, carries over enough of what Raw does that I think that the carrying over the name not only enhances my enjoyment of it because I have the original game in such high esteem, but also is valid. The interesting ways that you have scoring, and I think for a lot of people the scoring in the original Raw game is not that high on their list of what they like about it. I know some people don't like the set collection aspect of the scoring in Raw, but I think the parts of that are great for me in Raw carry over pretty much as well as you could imagine to Raw the Dice game. Like the whole river thing in Raw where, you can collect as many river tiles as you want in Raw and you'll have them from round to round. It's like a number that keeps rising. So you always have the potential of scoring a bunch for the river, but you have to get that flood tile. And so, you can win as many auctions as you want for river tiles, but if you don't win the auction for the flood tile, all those river tiles are worth nothing. Raw the Dice game does the same sort of thing where you can move up the river track as much as you want. Well, only up to 12 because that's the limit. But if you don't get the flood, if you don't spend 3 river dice to get the flood, then you're not going to score at all. And so that's just one thing that...
So, rude interruption. That's from Kellen. It could be any voice, but rude interruption from me. So you're saying not that you disagree with my premise, but that you disagree with my example that Raw the Dice game is not symbiotically related to Raw. So ergo, probably it's not ergo, but I'll say it again. Ergo, if we had a one-night ultimate werewolf where they took all the art, all the card powers, all the zaniness, but it wasn't a social deduction game, and
right.
We called it, one night werewolf in the park or something, and it was a co-op, would you be okay with that?
Would I be okay with the card game version of a One Night Ultimate Werewolf?
Yeah, I mean, in this
Although
case,
it
it wouldn't be named. It's already a card game, but these publishers have no shame.
No morals. I mean, it depends on how far it went. Like, I guess if the seer power had an analogous quality in the dice game version of One Night Ultimate Werewolf, then I could potentially be okay with it.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I think that that's where we differ, right? Because for me, like, there's this central thesis of any game,
sure,
and we've gone too far. It's sort of like Reiner Knizia is probably rife with this, where there's like Lost Cities, and then that's that great 2-player game, and then it's like Lost Cities Rivals has nothing to do with Lost Cities, and it's not even 2-player, and it's great. I really like Lost Cities Rivals, but it's not a Lost Cities game, and so
board game.
Yeah, and Keltis, and let's not even go down the rabbit hole. Sure. Keltis, the card game. Like, it goes pretty deep here, Mark.
Yeah.
So this will kick off the feature topic, I think, and so we can get everyone's thoughts here. Broadly speaking, I think there are re-implementations and reductions of board games like San Juan, like Roll for the Galaxy, or games that add the dice game and the card game, like Bang, the dice game being a re-implementation of Bang. And there are also shared universes. You have things like the Of the West Kingdom, where they make sort of games in a set, or the Spice Road collection, where they're games on a theme. So broadly speaking, I just wanted to ask you guys how you feel about these types of implementations, and what do you expect from them, and do you want to see them continue into the year 2022? Because all the publishers obviously listen to this, and once we sort of collectively agree on something, I assume the market will follow.
Honestly, and even after a series of pleasant experiences with the card games or the dice games version of other games that I've had recently, I still can't help but when I hear that there's a the dice game or the card game re-implementation of a game, expect that it's going to be of lesser quality, bordering on just basically when I hear one of these versions of a game is coming out, regardless of where it's coming from, regardless of the quality of the original game, I sort of just expect that re-implementation to be an average game. It just automatically in my head, when I hear that's coming out, I just think, okay, it's going to be okay. I don't ascribe to it any higher quality or really even really hope for any higher quality. I don't assume that there's any really chance of it being good. I usually think like, well, if it was going to be a good game, they would just make it its own good game. The fact that they're trying to shoehorn this earlier game naturally for me just makes me assume, for right or wrong, and again, I've been proven wrong a couple times in my recent plays, that it's going to be a okay game. It's going to be a forced game, a forced design.
I don't think I disagree with that premise, but I think where I would disagree is I still kind of want them to try it. I think that I've mentioned this before, like the process of like adapting video games to board games, like an adaptation at large is something I enjoy experiencing. And sometimes I think of this in the kind of the same vein, right? Of like, you've taken Ra, you've decided what you think is the key essence maybe of that game, and you're like, how do I preserve this in a different form? And it's a lot of what people, I would assume, try to do when they're adapting books and films, right? It's like, you know it's going to be different. You know it's not going to be the same to anyone that's experienced the previous iteration of that game, but can you open it up to a new audience while preserving the essence of it? And like, one of the things where maybe I agree with Kellen when it comes to Ra loves dice games is that I don't know that the key essence of Ra is the scoring system, which seems to be the main thing that got translated, right? They made a great game in the process, don't get me wrong, but I think everyone would say that the key essence of Ra is the auctions, and that is gone by the wayside. So I think that that's an interesting discussion of like, what is your ultimate goal as a designer versus like the very cynical, just doing it to like cash in on a name question.
And you know what? One interesting thing is I'd love to hear the thoughts of somebody who's played Ra the dice game and the original Ra and is one of those people who really does not like the scoring of original Ra. Because I actually like the original set collection aspect of the scoring of Ra, and I wonder if somebody who like likes the auction part of Ra doesn't like the set collection, and I think there's a sizable number of those folk, what they would think about Ra the dice game if they would have a much less high opinion of it.
Part of this discussion is really pedantic from my background in branding, marketing, naming. You know, like literally part of my career is helping companies name smartphones. Like that was my first job out of college. And so when you add like colon the dice game or, you know, colon the card game, I actually have different expectations than when you take Puerto Rico and make San Juan, right? Where San Juan, in some ways, is Puerto Rico, the card game, but it has a different set of expectations for me. I think another good example of this is one of my favorite games of all time, Tournay. You know, there is sort of a sister card game version called Tournay that Neelan and I had a chance to play, and it shares a lot of art, it shares a lot of iconography, and it shares some gameplay ideas and concepts, but it's not Tournay. And so if you had named that game Tournay, the card game, I would have had huge issues with it as a product because it just doesn't do what it says it is. And then you go further than that, and they've recently released Tournay Dice. Not the dice game, thank God, they got rid of the colon. But they also got rid of the only good things about Tournay and kept the iconography and then used the iconography in different ways, which is the worst decision I could possibly think of. So for me, there's this element where some of it has to be cynical, reusing the art, it's cheaper, you know, people already like this, so I'm just going to attach it to that. And that's not always the case. But are there any differences in your expectation when something is literally labeled like the dice game or the card game?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there is a very specific expectation, like you said, Kellen. Like, I think the Tournay example is perfect, and it makes me wonder what your reaction to Tournay Dice would have been had it been named like, you know, something else beginning with a T and had the same art, had the same sort of feel.
God loves
Yeah,
T.
exactly. God loves Tournay. But yeah, I do think that when you're specifically invoking the original game, there is an expectation. There is an expectation that you are attempting to meet some of the design goals of the original game. And I guess it's debatable which of those design goals are the ones that they were trying to preserve. What's interesting, I think, in the case of what you've described about Tournay Dice and Tournay, I feel like Tournay almost gets a little bit more closer to Tournay than the Tournay Dice does.
Absolutely. 100%. And this isn't like a small thing, right? Like I've started pulling some lists. Castles of Burgundy, the card game. Castles of Burgundy, the dice game. Modern Art card game. Dominant Species, the card game. Shadows over Camelot, the card game. Power Grid, the card game. Alhambra, the card game. Medici, the dice game. Broom Service, the card game, which is a trip because Broom Service was already a remake of an older card game. Samurai, the card game. Carson City, the card game. Karuba, the card game. And Las Vegas, the card game. Because Las Vegas is a dice game, even though it's not called Las Vegas, the dice game.
I just discovered Karuba the card game exists, and now I need to get this.
Well, but is that your reaction?
No, it kind of is, and I'm not even kidding. Like that's kind of the funny thing is that because I'm now suddenly very interested because I like Karuba, so now I'm very intrigued to look at Karuba the card game and not just buy it on site, but what is it? Is it preserving what I like about Karuba? Like what parts?
But Karuba's like almost a card game to begin with.
Sort of, but
almost.
Totally. And maybe if it got all the way to being like Karuba while only being a deck of cards, I would say that's positive. Like, that's a solid adaptation to me.
Maybe where I got burnt on this thing, where I just naturally think that, again, the card game or the dice game version of a game is not going to be great, is my one and only true love, Biblios. I played Biblios Dice, and I was like, I mean, it's not going to be Biblios, but it's Biblios in the title. Like, it's maybe in the same ballpark, and it's just not. It's a completely different game. It doesn't.
Are there more dice in it?
What's that?
Are there more dice in it?
And you have to roll it.
Biblios?
Ridiculous.
Like, no, but how many are there?
There's like 20.
Okay.
It just went crazy.
It's a lot of dice.
Well, I mean, the bigger sin is the rolling. You can't roll dice in Biblios. And so that was one of the fairly early re-implementations I played. And I was like, okay, this is just a game. Like, this literally, there's nothing Biblios-y about it. And from then on, I'm trying to psychoanalyze my feelings now about these games and trying to figure out where it stems from. But that was one of the early ones. And I was like, okay, well, this is nothing. This is just a okay game, but it has nothing to do with the prior version of it.
I think sometimes the more tragic version of this is when a game gets close, which is actually relevant in the context of a game that we played before recording today. We played Zooloretto, the dice game, and I think what was interesting to all of us as we started that game was this reaction, almost surprise of oh, this is actually getting reasonably close to the thing you like about Zooloretto and Coloretto, of putting things into trucks so that you're messing up the people that don't need them, but it doesn't quite get all the way there because the end game gets funky. And it's frustrating to see almost capturing a game. And there's a lot about Zooloretto that isn't captured in this at all, but getting close to what I think, again, is the essence of that game, the thing that you want to replicate, which in my opinion is almost perfectly captured in just Coloretto on its own, but then not getting all the way there.
That's funny. That origin is interesting, right? Because that starts as a mechanic in Colorado, right, in 2003. And so that's a small little thing. And then they're like, hey, wait, we could make a board game out of that. And so they made, what's basically Colorado the board game, but it's called Zooloretto. And then they're like, hey, wait, we could make a dice game version of that board game, and made Zooloretto the dice game in 2012.
And Aquaretto.
Yeah, we don't speak about Aquaretto.
But the thing is, they got rewarded, though, for that, because Zooloretto won the Spiel. It's like Colorado came out, fantastic. They made Zooloretto, and they won the biggest award in board games, which is sort of interesting that they got critical rewarded for it.
Yeah, I mean, Colorado is better than Zooloretto, Exhibit A. Exhibit B, for me, though, just by naming it the way they did, I'm somehow more okay with it. I don't know how else to say it where, let's take another example, like King Domino. Totally fine game, okay? And then there's King Domino Duel, where it's it has nothing, it's literally a two-player roll and write versus King Domino, has nothing to do with each other. They're literally only in the shared universe of King Domino, okay? How I feel about the Marvel shared universe. What do you think I think about the King Domino universe? Nothing. So for Coloretto to Zooloretto, it's they preserved the main mechanism. They really did preserve the feeling, and then they expanded on it and made something out of it. Now, I don't like it, but I prefer that to when they sort of just slap on the theme and say, this is the same game.
I have an example of the one time where I think the card game version exceeds the original version.
Amazing. What is it? I don't believe you.
This surprised the heck out of me. This is a game I recently played, went in with zero expectations, only played it because I thought it would be quick to learn and we were just trying to burn a few minutes. Camel Up, the card game.
No way.
It is a better version of the game. Camel Up. The Camel Up.
I
the
find
game.
that really hard to
I
believe.
know. I was like you. I was sitting in your chair feeling the exact same thing. It is superior.
Huh.
It is a
Talking
superior
about Camel
version.
Up Cards, sir?
Yes. Is a better game, and it keeps the original essence of Camel Up totally.
That's
the
very
betting,
cool.
the fact that camels can hop on each other and get moved down. But it's better because you don't have the dice, you have cards, and you can affect the odds of camels moving. And so you feel like you have a little more control, and it's way more exciting because you sort of, like 1x amount of the cards in the movement deck. So you're like, okay, I know that I took out a couple of the orange camels. I threw those away. They're in the discard pile. And I know that I have some of the white camel in there. So I'm going to bet on the white camel, but I'm not going to do it now because if I bet on the white camel now, my opponents are going to know I've seeded the deck with white camel movement cards. It is way better than original Camel Up. I am telling you this now. I didn't believe it. I thought there was no chance. I was playing it just to say I played it and get rid of it. And now I am keeping it, and I think it's honestly
I don't believe
superior. It is. I'm telling you it.
It doesn't
Superior.
have a 3D tree that pops out of when you open the
It does have a 3D tree. And it even has a little 3D animal.
Mark,
Fox.
what are you
Fox.
talking about, Mark? You're just lying now.
No, it has
It's
two...
a card game that has a 3D tree in it.
Yes, it does.
Okay,
Believe that or not.
explain that to the listeners.
Okay, there's a piece of wood in the box that looks like a tree. Boom.
It's 3D.
It's literally 3 dimensions.
But does it have a pyramid that dispenses cards?
It does not. That is the one thing that's worse. But I think people didn't like the pyramid. I love the pyramid. But that is the one occasion.
Like, card game versions for me frequently devolve into having just piles and piles and piles of cards to try to make up for it. I think the Castles of Burgundy, the card game, was a big offender of this for me. In addition, when we played the mini version of Brussels 1893, which was 1897, then it was just card piles and taking these cards and shuffling them there. And it was kind of one of those things where it was fine, but why did they need to do this? Because there's so many cards and so many piles. I will say, Mark, and you mentioned this, I think last week, the dice game that I actually like quite a bit, and it violates all my own rules that I've previously set up, is Istanbul. Istanbul, the dice game, is a totally pleasant little engine builder built off of rolling dice. I like it a lot, but it does remove what makes Istanbul Istanbul, which is the movement puzzle of having to figure out where you're going. So it literally violates all my rules of this type of thing. But I would recommend Istanbul, the dice game, to people and think it's a nice little pretty theme, fun rolling the dice, similar to like a Raw the Dice game for me. I find it quite pleasant. Mark doesn't, though.
I thought it was just totally okay. It felt to me the same way that Biblios Dice felt about Biblios. Like, it's a fine game. You know, you got the gems to keep the Istanbul theme, but it just didn't really feel that evocative or good.
Neelan, you got any good ones before we move on?
One example of a game that I want to throw out, because it in some ways sidesteps a lot of these issues by not overly simplifying the original game. So Race for the Galaxy is a card game which Tom Lehman
Is
designed.
already a card game version of another game.
Oh, that's
But
true,
keep going.
actually. Yeah, that's fair. But so Roll for the Galaxy takes the core of Race for the Galaxy and turns the card acquisition into dice acquisition. So as you are acquiring your sort of settlements and developments, you're getting more dice into your dice pool, and that each color of die is weighted towards different actions. And then as you roll those dice, you're going to choose which of those dice faces are going to determine your strength on the actions as you would have in a typical game of Roll for the Galaxy. So it kind of like preserves like you're leveraging towards certain powers. You're trying to activate and guarantee that certain roles and actions happen, but all of the mechanisms around it feel quite fundamentally different just by virtue of the fact that you don't have the reliance because you're rolling dice. But there is still this feeling like, in a way that feels quite different, where this build up of multicolored dice in your collection feels good in a way that doesn't exist in Race for the Galaxy. So in some ways it's layering on systems that give it like a quite different, unique feeling to it. To the extent that I've sort of famously said at this point that I didn't feel that strongly about Race for the Galaxy in my initial plays of it, when I learned Roll for the Galaxy, it kind of felt like, oh, I kind of get what the appeal of the original is enough that I really forced myself to go back to Race and play it with a more open mindset.
Which of the two do you prefer?
That's hard because all of the Race of the Galaxy games I've played since have actually only been on BGA. I've played it a fair bit on BGA. I would have to play Race again in person, I think, to make that call. But I think I still slightly lean Roll for the Galaxy a little bit. And I think that's probably more to do with the fact that async card games are a little bit weird.
Sure.
I think Roll for the Galaxy would be a better game except for its big critical blunder.
You rolled dice? Biblios style, no rolling would be better?
I'm just waiting for Neelan to ask.
What's that, Callan?
It's that you can cheat in it and people can't see you.
Rolling behind shields?
And, if it's so easy to cheat, then obviously you're going to cheat because it's not in the rules not to cheat. And if people can't see you cheating, then I cheat. So it's, my win rate, 100%, but that is sort of a critical problem.
That's true. They didn't think of that.
Yeah, it's a shame.
There's nothing in the rules that says a dog can't play Roll for the Galaxy.
It's the one blunder.
Yeah, do not cheat.
Moving on to the last question we had, we wanted to envision some games that we would like to see a dice or a card game version of, and we'd love for you to sound off and give us some of your own thoughts on what would be the card game or the dice game. So we'll be collecting those responses on Discord and on our Facebook group. The first one that immediately came to mind for me would be a dice game version of Azul. I don't exactly know how this would work, and they've already kind of abused this theme a little bit, but the idea of rolling dice, assigning them into hops, and then drafting those hops feels like it would work in a cute little clever dice game way. And so for me, the point of Azul sort of being how you draft and how you hate draft and where you put stuff. I think you could preserve a lot of Azul in a dice game version, and that could be super pleasant.
I'm now just imagining the bag full of just like Azul dice, like by the 100, and that is pretty. I'm already there. I want it.
And in this game, we'll have in the rule book, you can't cheat, just to make sure that it's clear to people.
One of the ones I thought of, and I don't know if this would work well, but I actually thought of this in response to us playing Rod Dice Game, because Gùgōng has a similar sort of structure where you have multiple mini games sort of happening on this board. You have this explorer map, you have this great wall, you have this steps, and you're sort of working your way up them by playing cards towards them. So the idea of like turning all of that again in the same way that Ra simplifies its scoring into a score sheet and having each of the regions of the Gùgōng board just be different scoring criteria that all play a little bit differently, and having the dice in some way replace the card system where you are playing cards into areas in order to use their actions. I think there's something there, and Gùgōng has a sort of very pleasant midweight Euro game that I like a lot. I think that there might be something to the idea of taking its mini games and boiling them down into a simplified dice package.
I think what makes Raw the Dice Game work, though, is that it feels very interactive in terms of like who is what and where they are. I know Lagrange has a dice game roll and write version. It's very popular called No Siesta. Yeah, but from my understanding, it's basically just like completely separate. You're kind of doing your own thing. And so I think you could distill a lot of these medium weight Euro games down into like roll and writes where you don't ever touch each other. Yeah. And like that would be the scary part.
That is actually interesting, because now that you think about it, what I'm saying is taking like all those interactive elements and like disseminating them to players, which maybe isn't exactly the right way to take that. But I don't know. I wonder.
I want to try Gùgōng. I've not played it, so I'm not harping on I'm harping on you in general, right? Just as like a human, but not that selection.
Although actually, envisioning it as like Raw the Dice Game, where it is still a shared board, and each of those games is still like a shared competitive environment, I don't think you would have to lose that.
I'm really struggling trying to figure out a game that I think would make for the dice game version. The only one that sort of I could think of, and I feel like this may actually already exist, and if it doesn't, then TM it. But The Crew, the dice game, sort of a liar's dice, but cooperative. I feel like there's something there that is interesting and feels like it could be a game that is taught quickly and played easily. It could be a family, like a quick, everybody sit down and plays together and is cooperatively having a good time and trying to succeed in these missions. Feels like there could be something there.
the thing I like about this exercise is, as not game designers, I can picture what you're describing, right? Which is everyone rolls their dice, they hide them under cups, and you're sort of trying to work cooperatively. But what the game isn't ours to figure out. So.
That's right.
Amazing. Love it. 10 out of 10. I've got two more, but I will just do both so that not belabor the episode. No Thanks, the dice game. There's something in my mind about, like, in No Thanks, the card game, it's like, put a chip, I don't want to take it. There's something about, like, if you can't pay, you have to take the dice. So when you pay a chip, that lets you re-roll, and kind of keep going, and that's where the press your luck is. And I feel like that could get explosively pretty interesting. And now, for my drumroll, please, the premier retheme card game. Well, I would hope for retheme, but if it has to stay, card game. Sidereal Confluence, the card game.
Wait, yes, I don't know the game. What's the actual game? I've never heard of that.
Sidereal Confluence, Trading and Negotiating in the Elysian Quadrant, Remastered Edition, the card, the card game.
Okay, now I know what you're talking about.
This game is so sprawling, and all the resources are so bitty and so annoying. I just want the reduction, the simplification. There's a Dune Express that was remade as Dune The Dice Must Flow, I think, and it's actually coming again as Dune The Oil Must Flow in 2021 that actually does a pretty good job of distilling down Dune and sort of those disparate player powers into a dice game. I don't want to do dice to Sidereal Conflicts, but I want to simplify. I want to make the trading just cards in your hand, so you're sort of trading cards back and forth instead of just like this sprawling craziness. I know there's already a lot of cards in Sidereal, but basically, if that game was 30 to 45 minutes and just a hand of cards, I would like it a lot more.
You know what that sounds like? It sounds like Pit with powers.
Exactly,
Can you imagine that? Oh my god, that actually works. Holy cow.
Think about that,
It's
Neil.
funny, though, because you did remind me, like, I've actually... The closest I have come to, like, experimenting with designing a game on my own was taking, like, Founders of Gloomhaven and the Great Zimbabwe, like, that style of commodity trading, and turning it into a card game. So I do think that this is maybe in the ballpark of what you're talking about. So let's get together. We can hash this thing out.
Let's get together. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Board Game Barrage podcast. This is the last week to get your answers in for the listener top 20. We're going to be using your listener submissions for your top 20 in an episode next week. So please get those in at boardgamebarrage.com/top20. As always, you can find us on all forms of social media. You can chat with us on Discord at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. You can talk to us in our Facebook group at boardgamebarrage/Facebook. And we are giving away a copy of Hansa Teutonica and a Board Game Barrage t-shirt if you join before the end of February. So the days are counting down, so you better get in there. You better make a Facebook account. Make Mr. Zuckerberg happy. He's a very, very happy man already. He's very rich, so... I don't know that you'll make him happy by joining. As always, thank you to Heart Society for their fantastic intro song, What's on Your Mind, Kid, from their album Wake the Queens. Thank you, and good night.
Bye-bye.
Let's hit record. Here we go. Mark
Yes, sir.
is telling me that we all have to speak slowly and stop saying so that his
Me
life
included.
is easier.
To be fair.
Okay. And then I said that I'm a fast talker, and Mark said...
You are not a fast talker. Well, you may be a fast talker in the grand scheme, but among the four of us, you are the slowest talker by far.
Excuse me, sir?
That's not a comment on the quality of that talking.
Yeah, I think it's like a desirable thing. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I'm the one more likely to say things quickly and trip over my words because, as my mother used to always say to me, Neelan, enunciate. Enunciate.
Yeah, I think you are the machine gun of us.
Neelan?
Yeah, Neelan is definitely the machine gun. For sure. His waveform is like... Christina is like a shotgun.
Okay.
Like,
Nice. Powerful.
it's like slow, and then it's like... There's like an explosion of
Yes.
stuff.
Yes. What am I?
What's the best gun? I'm whatever the best gun is. And then you are... What are you?
Don't
It's
say
hard
it.
for you... Like, what's a slow gun?
A water gun?
Okay.
Super soaker.
I will
Like
concede
smooth.
slow talker as long as you will concede that I am the fastest thinker. So
Okay.
kind of
First of all,
together.
no,
Excuse me.
will not concede. But
Correlation
I just want
there.
to make it clear that the fact that you talk the slowest, and this sounds like so pejorative the way we're saying it, but like you are the easiest to edit. You are the most concise of the four of us for sure. The best to edit award. I'm bestowing it now.
So, wait,
Goes
this
to
is not
Callan Allen.
okay. Christina's very.
I'm just laughing, and I can't even hear your side of it. I just know it. Whatever you're saying is funny because of his face.
Yeah, because it's untrue. It's unjust.
It's unjust. Not only is it untrue, but it's unjust.
She's waiting in the wings. She wants to get in here.
Shotgun primed.
This shotgun is ready.
That's right. Did you tell her she's the shotgun?
You are the shotgun, Christina. How does that feel? It feels good, she says.
Good.
Hello, and welcome to episode number 1.
What order do we want to go with? I mean, it's best probably if we go raw last, right? To
Yes.
go into.
We play God Loves Dinosaurs. So God Loves Dinosaurs is probably the hottest.
But it's Gods Love Dinosaurs, right?
Yes, Gods Love Dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Gods?
Not
What
the
did I
Christian
said?
God.
Oh, there are multiple gods.
Multiple gods. We are all gods and all
But if-
dinosaurs.
Okay, but if the title is true, then so was my revision
Right.
to the title. Do you see what I'm saying? If gods,
Right.
then God.
I think
Or
we're...
is there a lowercase g, uppercase g situation?
Yeah, that could
No, I don't
be.
think it's a lowercase, uppercase. It's that just saying
It's like
God loves
God
dinosaurs
implies-
single.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So
You could say a God loves
a
dinosaurs.
god loves dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go with that. If they would have a much less high opinion of it.
there's something about this discussion that's very pedantic. Is that the word I'm looking for? Probably. Is that everything I say?
What are you trying to say?
I don't know. What does pedantic mean?
Like sort of plotting and
Yeah.
and
Overly concerned with minute details. One of my favorite things about Christina and I's relationship, by the way, favorite things ever, is that I will frequently, and by frequently I mean at least semi-weekly, twice a week or more, we'll be going on walks and I'll use a word and she won't know what it means. And then she asks me what it means, and then I say, well, I don't actually know what it means either. No, but then the story's not over. Then we look it up, and in fact, I have used the word correctly.
Nice.
But I just read it somewhere, and it's sort of like osmosis.